Fools learn from their own mistakes. Wise people learn from the mistakes of others. So you guys get to benefit from my foolishness. Hey friends, so I've made a couple of rugs on this channel using the punch needle, and I was kind of thinking to myself, surely there's a way to push the medium a bit further and just experiment a bit with what we can do using the punch needle. I've had a few brainstorm ideas, but I don't quite know how I'm going to do some of them because they're kind of advanced. So I thought to myself, maybe what we should do is start with something simple and then like build our way up together. So today I thought it'd be sick to do a little pouch bag using the punch needle. I'm gonna go super simple with the design so anyone can follow along. Usually I add like a lot of artwork into what I'm doing, but I think just for the purposes of doing this example, I'm gonna do a really simple design, probably like some flames or some clouds, and then later on when we're doing something more advanced, then we can move on to more intricate designs and adding in different materials and so on and so forth. But for right now, I think we should just do a simple bag. Let's go. First thing we're going to need is a frame and some material to make this bag. I'm using an old canvas which I've cut the middle out of and some monk's cloth. The reason I use monk's cloth is because it doesn't damage when you put the punch needle through it, and it makes it perfect for doing this type of design. Once I've clipped it down to the board, I'm just going to draw out my pattern. I had to freestyle this pattern because I had no idea what I was doing for the size of this bag as I was making it, but sometimes the best things you can do is make it up as you go along. What I've done is added a template in the description that you can download with the measurements. It's probably going to be too big to print off on a printer, but it will give you exactly the shapes and sizes that I've used for this bag. As you can see, I made a few mistakes while I was making it, but at least you will have the benefit of my mistakes and knowledge. Moving on now, I'm just going to draw in the design. I decided to do, like I said, a very simple flame design just because flames are sick, and also I think it would be a nice little easy way to make this bag without too much pressure. So we're going to make this bag nice and fluffy, and I'm going to use this punch needle along with a black and lilac thread. So a lot of people have a bit of trouble when they first start punch needling. They can't keep the loops in, they can't quite get the technique. I'm going to try and lay out some basics so that you guys can learn how to use the punch needle effectively and to make it easier for you guys to pick up the skill. But speaking of learning, it's a great time to introduce the sponsor of this video, Skillshare. On Skillshare, you'll find an extensive amount of classes that cover a broad range of topics like illustration, painting, and a whole bunch of craft videos too. As you guys know, on this channel I do a lot of bag making, but one of my big weaknesses that I'm trying to work through is stitching. I've been watching a class on leather craft basics by Robin Fitzsimmons. I like to be very subversive with my designs and challenge norms, but you can't really challenge norms unless you know the basics. And I found that this course had been a great way for me to figure out exactly what I'm doing wrong, learn from my mistakes, and grow as a designer. One thing I love about Skillshare is the curated and specific learning experience. There's no ads, and they're always launching new premium classes, so you can stay focused whenever you want to learn a new skill. An annual subscription to Skillshare is less than $10 a month, and the first 1,000 people to use the link in the description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium membership. Thank you again to Skillshare, and now let's move on to the tips on how to use the punch needle. So tip 1 is to punch slowly when you're starting out. I mean this in two ways. I mean literally when you actually start punching, you should move slowly. The reason is the monk's cloth becomes tighter as more fabric is punched into it. So as you're punching your wool, more wool will take up space where the holes are, and eventually it becomes so tight that the punch needle, you can go as fast as you'd like. But when you're first starting out, it's very loose as a fabric and it's very easy for the loops to come out. So the slower that you move, the better, because it will help for the monk's cloth to close slowly around the loops to make sure that they stay in. Also, when I say when you're starting out, I literally mean when you're first doing it. If this is your first time using a punch needle, I would say just move slowly, because it will help you figure out the rest of the techniques that I'm going to list, and also it will make sure that when you're designing, you're actually hitting the line work the way that you need to. The second tip is to keep the wool as loose as possible when you're punching. A big reason why some of the loops come out is because the wool catches as you're punching, and what happens is it pulls out as you're moving along. So if you can keep a bunch of slack wool right next to you as you're punching, it will prevent this from happening because it will never get too tight. Third, don't lift the tip of the punch needle too high off of the fabric. This is because it will cause loops to be on the back side, and then this is harder for you to stick down, and also it can catch and ruin the whole design once it's laid down. Like Aaliyah said, if at first you don't succeed, dust yourself off and try again. If you make a mistake with any sort of line, you can easily just pull it out. The fabric is very forgiving. All you need to do is rub it a little bit and it will go back to normal, and you can start doing your punch all over again. Make sure the punch needle goes all the way through to the other side of the fabric, meaning that the end of the punch needle needs to hit the fabric, and then you can do another loop. This can cause problems because what it will do is, if there isn't a deep enough punch and the consistency of the punch is different every single time, then you're going to have inconsistent loops. And because this is loop, not cut pile, you'll see large differences if there's some tiny loops and some larger loops. The space on the punch needle fabric is filled out by the loops, and if you have tiny ones, there's less space for it to take up. So basically, if you push all the way in and all the way out, you end up with consistent loops, and you'll end up with a consistent texture of whatever it is you're making, whether it be a rug or, obviously in this case, it's a bag. When you thread the punch needle, you'll find that there's a small opening in the back and there's a large opening where the punch needle tip will hit the fabric. You want to make sure that the large opening is facing in the direction that you want to punch. You also want to make sure that you're holding the punch needle at a slight angle. Anything under a 90-degree angle will do, but I would suggest probably trying to do 50 or 45 degrees. Holding it like this makes it easier for the monk's cloth to close around the loops as you're punching, because as you're coming out, you get the benefit of the slant in the punch needle sloping out very slowly, which helps the monk's cloth close. It's a good idea to punch in sections. This isn't necessarily something that you have to do, but I think it just helps you with the psychology of working on a piece that could be quite large, even a small piece. Using a punch needle is very therapeutic and it's a very relaxing activity, but if you have a goal in mind and you're impatient like me, it becomes kind of hard to sit there for hours and hours without seeing results. Obviously, this is a long process and it's very rewarding, but you know, we're impatient people, we're creatives, and we want to see the fruits of our labors come to fruition. If you punch in small sections, it can give you that feeling of achievement because you finished a section. So rather than feeling like you're just constantly punching in one direction and making no headway, if you can punch in small sections, I would suggest squares, and then continue going from there. You'll feel the achievement every single time that you do it. Also, this technique is really good for timekeeping. When you punch in sections, you can time how long the sections take, and you can work out exactly how long the entire piece is going to take based on how long the sections take individually. Punch your lines extremely close together if you can. Don't worry about the punch needle going through and hitting the other side of the loops and maybe causing some trouble, because you can very easily untangle any loops that are messed up. And also, if you pull any loops out longer than they need to be, so say the punch needle hits a loop and then it pulls it out a bit, you don't need to worry because the rest of the loops will compensate for the negative space created, and once you glue it down, you won't have a problem anyway. Also, when you punch close together, it gives you the ability to do line work, which is very intricate. If you punch too far away from each other, then it can kind of be hard to do very intricate lines, especially considering the fact that the nature of a rug is that it's a little bit fluffy and messy, and that's kind of the aesthetic that we're going for. But you can kind of lessen this effect a little bit by punching super close together. Make sure that the wool is the right size for the punch needle. This is something that you'll learn through actually doing it and experience. It's hard to give guides, but in general, you want to make sure that the wool that you're using slides through the punch needle and the hole in the back of the punch needle super easily. You might have to buy a few pieces of wool and experiment, but you can go through the general measurements that you get whenever you buy the product. You'll find that there's a whole bunch of stray fabric that's left over from every time that you've stopped punching and either used a new piece of wool or changed the punch needle. You can just use a regular pair of fabric scissors to get rid of these loose ends. You'll find that some of the loops that you've made have overlapped onto each other and it kind of messes up your lines a little bit. This isn't a problem at all. All you need to use is a sharp object. You can just use the scissors that you were using and then just slowly and very carefully untangle the loops that are in the wrong place. Take your time doing this, there's no rush and you don't want to end up pulling anything out. But at this point, there'll be so much fabric in the monk's cloth that you shouldn't be able to pull anything out anyway. Now I'm going to move on to constructing the actual bag itself. I'm going to hot glue into the negative space that I left with the punch needle and add some Velcro. add some PVA glue to the back of the design just to make sure that all of the loops stay in and that they don't come out while you're using the bag. And to spread it across, I'm just going to use this flat knife, but you can use anything that's flat in your house. Once that's all spread out, I'm going to add the other side of the Velcro to the opposite side of the bag so they all line up perfectly and it will close how it needs to. I've decided that I'm going to add a zip to the inside of the bag, so I'm just marking out the amount of zip that I need. I used about 13 centimeters since the bag was 15 centimeters in width, and I'm just constructing it, adding on the top of the zip to the sides. I'm just going to use a flat piece of wool fabric for the inner lining. I'm going to cut out the shape that I need for the zip, and then I'm going to place it on the inside of the bag itself. So once again, I'm just going to cut out the measurements. I've added the measurements in the link in the description just because I had to freestyle it. I didn't quite know what I was doing. But I believe I ended up with a small rectangle, which was 13 centimeters by 1.2 centimeters. I'm just going to use a cutting knife to cut out the inside. It's better than using scissors, even though you can just fold it over, but a knife is better. I'm going to place this over to see if it fits and then add hot glue to the side so that I can attach the zip while it's still closed. Make sure that you're leaving enough space on the side so that the zip can close properly and it can reach each other so you're not stretching out the fabric when it's closed. And make sure that you're adding enough glue to both sides so that the zip can hold in place perfectly. You should be able to open and close it within a couple of seconds of adding the glue. Now to make sure that this opens as a pocket, I'm just going to add a flat piece of wool to the back of this piece that I've done so that when you open up the zip and put something inside, it doesn't fall all the way to the bottom of the bag and you can still reach it. Because this is a pouch design, it's going to be kind of hard to get all the way to the bottom of the bag, so it's nice to be able to reach in just to a smaller section to get some other things out. Once the glue is almost fully dry, I'm going to add some spray adhesive to both sides so that the outside of the bag doesn't have any glue in it and the inside of the bag doesn't have any glue of it, but the two sides still stick together, if any of that made sense. All I need to do now is cut out the piece that I'm using, and as you can see, it folds just like this, morphing into the shape of the bag that I'm going to be making. Now that I know that everything lines up correctly, the only thing that I need to do is get rid of these extra side pieces. But the idea now is to actually stick them together so that it holds up the structure of the bag. I've got a little bit more than I need, so I'm just going to cut off some of the edges using my fabric scissors again. I don't want to cut off too much because, like I said, I do need enough of the edge so that I can stick it together to form the shape of the bag. I'm just going to thread a needle with the same wool that I used to make the actual punch needle bag itself. And what I'm going to do is a whip stitch all the way across the top edge where the zip is. I'm starting with just the top edge because I'm not going to be able to go into this with the whip stitch once I've started the rest of the bag. So it's important that I do it from now. This is quite a time consuming process also, but this is the part that's going to turn it from looking like a flat piece of fabric into an actual proper bag. So it's a really important step. Once I get to the end of the line that I'm applying the whip stitch to, I'm just going to put my needle through the wool that I've already threaded and put it nice and tight so it stays in. Next, I'm going to add some hot glue to the sides, which I've trimmed down. I'm going to fold over the bag, sticking it down, basically creating the exact shape that I want for the bag. Now I know that it will hold in place when I'm actually doing the stitching. I'm just going to cut off the corner. The reason I do this is because it helps for the stitch to hold at the bottom without having excess monster cloth showing. And I'm going to continue with the whip stitch as normal. The most important part to get right is the corners, because this is what's going to hold the lid of the bag to the body of it. Make sure that you do a super tight whip stitch around this area. Obviously you want to whip stitch the whole thing so that it's all uniform, but just pay extra attention to this part so that it all holds together nicely. Once the whip stitch done, all I need to do is make sure that I can attach a strap to the bag now. I have these spare pieces of leather, which I've just cut into strips that are 2 centimeters by 7 centimeters. And I'm going to hot glue them together and then hot glue that to the bag. I actually also stitched it in because it wasn't holding very well, but I didn't actually manage to film that. So when you're doing it, just make sure that you stitch it in. And just like that, we are done. This is such a simple thing to make. It is a bit timely with the punch needle just because it does take a while to get this done. But if you can find a few hours just to put into it, like, it actually turns out so nice. And like the acrylic chain, you guys know I love acrylic chains, turned out super well. If I could change anything, I think I would just adjust how I've done the middle and how I've done the strap. But other than that, I think it's great because we can work on that for the next one. But anyway, I hope this inspires you to try your own project and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye friends.